So tonight we begin our Dhamma study for this year. For the last 3 or 4 years over the winter we've been doing this. I think we're starting a little bit later than usual, but it's an auspicious time to start this. We've been talking a lot about this lately, and Mary brought it up a little bit last week, and all of us at one point or another just acknowledging how remarkable it is that these teachings are still available to us after all these years, and that they're still available to us in the way the Buddha originally presented that. It's just remarkable. It really is. I'm going to give a little bit more background than I was planning on, just because Bill's here and Eric's here, just to put the proper context. We all know that it doesn't do much good to teach the Buddha's teachings out of context. It's hard to understand how to develop them. The Buddha awakened to gain wisdom of the fact that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths that lead to all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing unsatisfactory experiences. That's taught in the Paticca-Samuppada Sutta, the Sutta on Dependent Origination, and many other suttas. The Buddha didn't teach that once. He taught it often, and with really remarkable consistency how he presented it. That really is the primary problem, is the common human problem of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So the Buddha's very first teaching was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the sutta establishing for the first time in history Four Noble Truths. Included in the Four Noble Truths is the path developing the wisdom of a Buddha, the Eightfold Path. And everything the Buddha would teach for his entire 45-year teaching career was taught in the context of dependent origination and in the context of the Eightfold Path. The only path the Buddha ever taught was the Eightfold Path. It proves to be enough. And the only meditation method the Buddha ever taught was Shamatha-Vipassana meditation. That proved to be enough and effective in developing what the Buddha hoped to teach. The way this course works is we read a chapter a week. We come back the next week and we discuss it, and then we move on to the next week. So next week we're going to read as a Sangha this chapter on Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, how to establish it. It's old hat to most of you, but I think every one of you will find that you'll gain a little bit more insight into how to properly meditate and how to properly apply concentration. Every time we go through it, you gain more out of it. This week, the introduction, you can read this also, and it wouldn't hurt because I'm not going to go over the whole thing. Just some points of it to again, put things in context. I'll read a little bit from it, though. The Buddha taught a simple and direct path of developing lasting peace and happiness. This teaching is accessible and understandable to anyone who takes to the Dhamma wholeheartedly. In this study, there will be no analysis of concepts or an attempt to prove the validity of the Buddha's teachings within any tradition that developed after the Buddha's death. I'm only focused, as most of you that come here know, that I'm only focused on what the Buddha actually taught during his lifetime. That's enough. And even why will become clear in just a moment. I will explain terms as I understand them and as supported by the Pali Canon. I will, by necessity and intending right speech, show where adaptations and accommodations to the Buddha's original teachings have occurred and become generally accepted as Buddhist teachings. I intend no disrespect to any tradition, school, or Buddhist religion. I intend only clarity and to teach a useful Dhamma. One of the things, as I developed an understanding of the Pali Canon and the breadth of it, over the 45 years of the Buddha's teaching career, if you read any sutta in the right context, you realize that sutta is being presented situationally, meaning it's what's occurring right now, the people in front of the Buddha, but always in the context of dependent origination and Four Noble Truths. And that's remarkable when you look at it that way. But also, over the course of 45 years, the Buddha never felt it necessary to adapt or accommodate or embellish his original teachings, ever. He was so clear and had developed so profound an understanding of the nature of suffering that there was no need to add or embellish or accommodate it. Every situation that arose during the Buddha's teaching career arose in such a manner that the Buddha was able to see the truth in it, no matter how off-center it might seem to be at first, including teaching murderers on the street that he encountered, teaching them the Dhamma and seeing them awaken in front of his eyes. And again, the reason why I'm saying that is it puts what we're going to do over the next 12 weeks in context, and the importance of being focused on what the Buddha taught. He is, after all, an awakened human being. He knew what he was doing when he taught this Dhamma. And it's proven to be highly effective to those that have developed it as it was presented for all these many years. Remember when we started the 6 talks on the Anapanasati Sutta, that sutta wasn't primarily on breath meditation. It was primarily to hold as an example the senior monks that have developed, remember how it started, the heartwood of the Dhamma. They developed the Eightfold Path. And so they were in a position to now teach others. And then it gets into how to practically apply breath meditation during whatever comes up during meditation. In the Samsapa Sutta, the Buddha describes the purpose of his teachings. And what have I taught? I teach the nature of suffering or stress. I teach the origination of suffering, craving and clinging. I teach that cessation of stress or dukkha is possible, the third noble truth. And I teach that the Eightfold Path is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. This is what I teach. And why have I taught these things? Because they are connected with a goal. They relate to the rudiments of a mindful life. They relate to the foundation of a mindful life. These teachings develop disenchantment and dispassion. The two things that a self-referential ego self wants nothing to do with, does it? It wants to maintain passion about everything, especially maintaining wrong views of itself. In fact, when it gets passionate is when it feels most in control, doesn't it? And it's when we're at our most mindless, often, when that occurs. I'll say that again. And why have I taught these things? Because they are connected with a goal. They relate to the rudiments of a mindful life. These teachings develop this disenchantment and dispassion. These teachings develop cessation of stress and unhappiness. They bring calm and direct knowledge. These teachings develop self-awakening and unbinding. This is why I have taught them. Very clear and direct, isn't it? He taught them to develop self-awakening and unbinding. Unbinding from clinging to wrong views, rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. The Buddha continues. Therefore, your practice is contemplating and understanding this is stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the path leading to the cessation of stress. This is what we're to contemplate and understand and to integrate into our lives. Again, the Buddha in the sutta is simply emphasizing the importance of developing what he taught. My words here. The original teachings of the Buddha are the most practical teachings for developing lasting peace and happiness still present in the world today. These teachings are presented to end all suffering in this present lifetime. Another thing that I found so disillusioning and prone to want to continue more ignorance is when I was told repeatedly that it takes endless eons to develop these teachings. And often it was presented that it is impossible now. In fact, I still remember this one particular teacher saying to me, it is impossible now to develop the Buddhist teachings. We have degenerated as a society so far that it is impossible to develop this. So let's do these other things. And that's justification for abandoning what the Buddha taught and getting into the other things that I've developed. The Buddha never taught that. And I remember the first time I read it and how empowering it was, that the Buddha taught a path for awakening in this lifetime, in this moment, as our lives unfold, not something that's going to happen in endless lifetimes in the future. The Buddha taught a Dhamma to develop right here, right now, and awaken in this present lifetime. And the simple fact, you don't have to look at our own Sangha, although it's remarkable, the development of the Dhamma within the Sangha. Just look at the beginning of the Anapanasati Sutta, and the Buddha names off 20 different monks that have awakened listening to the Buddha's teachings, and that's certainly not all of them. But this is a Dhamma to awaken in this lifetime. This 10-week course will present Shamatha-Vipassana meditation within the context of an ancient and profound teaching known as Four Noble Truths. These Four Noble Truths are the Buddha's teachings on the underlying unsatisfactory and distracting nature of human life and the cause of those unsatisfactory experiences, craving for and clinging to, craving for a continued self-referential existence based on wrong views, ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and clinging to those identities once established. And that creates that ongoing feedback loop that keeps us stuck in that ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Let me go ahead just a little bit. So the Buddha's sole purpose for teaching is to bring lasting peace and happiness to all who would wholeheartedly engage with the Dhamma. The Buddha's Dhamma does not include anything that does not directly develop his stated purpose or would likely lead to further confusion. He taught a very clean and specific and well-focused Dhamma. He did not teach anything that further distracted an already confused mind. The Buddha understood that teaching any subject that created further confusion would have been cruel. History has shown the Buddha to be the world's most refined and insightful thinker and the essence of compassion informed by true wisdom. In other words, he didn't lay anything out there that could possibly lead to more confusion when it's taken in the proper context. He consistently refused to answer questions on subjects such as eternalism, infinitude versus finite existence, the transmigration of a soul, what the self might be, and many other questions that would only cause additional confusion and a distraction from liberation. You remember that some of the suttas on Vacchagotta and those who come would answer these great questions, and the Buddha would always say, it's your questions that confuse you, let go of the questions. Or he would simply sit quietly to show that the question doesn't deserve an answer. It would just lead to more ignorance. So you think about even that profound gesture of an awakened human being asked a direct question, and the most compassionate and wise thing he can do is just sit quietly. Instead of making something up to prove that he knows everything. Every question doesn't deserve an answer, does it? The Buddha's teaching that. Many questions just lead to further confusion. Let go of the question. Come back to the mindfulness of the breath. Deepen concentration and frame your mindfulness by the Eightfold Path, and you'll gain understanding into the 3 marks of existence, which is what the Buddha taught is of primary importance. Not simply being mindful of everything, although that's an important thing. The type of mindfulness that the Buddha teaches is developed within the framework of the Eightfold Path, not outside of that framework. Mindfulness means to hold in mind or to recollect. And so we can hold in mind or to recollect anything, including unskillful things that can prove to be further distracting. Or we can develop the Eightfold Path and know what to hold in mind, according to a Buddha. It should be noted here that the Buddha did not intend to develop a religion or worship. He did not create a doctrine to be followed blindly. Put aside any ideas you may have of the Buddha as a religious, supernatural, or mystical being. The Buddha was simply a human being who, through his own effort and investigation, awakened to these truths. And he consistently referred to himself as a rightly self-awakened one. And just to remind us that there's nothing imposed on us. There's nothing that we gain save for our own understanding that leads to awakening. We become rightly self-awakened as the Buddha did, as he teaches. The Buddha taught a simple and straightforward method of understanding the truth of lasting peace and happiness. The path leading to lasting peace and happiness is the Eightfold Path. And Shamatha-Vipassana meditation is one factor, the 8th factor of that path. The Eightfold Path can be developed by anyone regardless of current religious practice. Some established religions have much fear arising from misunderstanding meditation and the investigation of the nature of stress and unhappiness. The Eightfold Path can be developed by anyone seeking a more meaningful life or simply a practical way of understanding themselves on a deeper, profound level. There's some modern religions that teach that meditation is the work of the devil. Those are usually the words used, and that an empty mind is a perfect place for the for the devil to cultivate whatever he wants to cultivate. Just not what the Buddha taught. And the Buddha didn't teach a meditation method to empty the mind. He taught a way to concentrate the mind without being distracted by the constant flow of feelings and thoughts. Just let me come back to the sensation of breathing. A basic concept of this course and Shamatha-Vipassana meditation is mindfulness. Mindfulness means to recollect or to hold in mind. By developing an understanding of the causes of stress and unhappiness, we can then be mindful or recollect and hold in mind the practice leading to lasting happiness. Again, that's integrating the Eightfold Path. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are presented in the second week of this course. And we went through those again over the summer, over the course of 7 weeks. So now you'll get a refresher on what the Buddha means initially by being mindful of the breath in the body. That begins our meditation practice and begins our concentration practice. And then to be mindful of feelings arising and passing away and thoughts arising and passing away. And finally, to be mindful of that present quality of our mind. The last instruction I give in meditation. Notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. That's the 4th foundation of mindfulness. It refers to that. And so our meditation is initially using the 4 foundations of mindfulness to develop a proper meditation practice to deepen concentration. And then you'll remember in that sutta how the Buddha then takes that well-concentrated mind and uses that well-concentrated mind to hold key concepts of the Dhamma, such as the 7 factors of awakening or the 5 hindrances, or those 4 foundations themselves. And finally, in the Anapanasati Sutta, to be mindful of the breath arising and passing away. Just one more part that I wanted to get to. So let me just read this small section, and then we'll have a discussion about it. I have found the most useful and effective Buddhist teachings to be those that are the direct teachings of the Buddha. This book and everything that I write and teach is based entirely on those teachings. A sutta is a direct teaching of the Buddha as preserved in the Pali Canon or occasionally by one of the senior monks or nuns. The rest of this is important. This part, all translations of the Pali Canon are at least partially interpretive based on the translator's understanding of the intent and context of the subject matter. This came up a few times recently, so I'll talk a little bit about it. When someone is doing a scholarly translation of the Pali Canon, whether it's from the original Pali, which the Buddha spoke a language that was similar to Pali, but still slightly different. But most of the translations are going to come from the direct Pali into English, if that's what the translator is doing. But also there was a large translation of the Pali into German many, many years ago. And a lot of the modern translators use the German translation to now bring it into English. There's also the Chinese agamas, A-G-A-M-A-S, which are somewhat similar to the Sutta Pitaka, but there's some significant differences there. And a good percentage of the modern translations also have come through the Chinese translation. So you can see that with every translation, no matter how well-versed someone is in the particular language, let's say Pali, they're trying to do 2 things. They're being scholarly authentic to the words on the page in front of them, but they're also trying to put it in a usable context. And that's where the difficulty can arise. Depending on the view of the translator, that can skew the eventual context. And it's certainly what happened with the agamas. But also sometimes just searching for a word. You'll pick the best word. And Pali is a very difficult language to translate into English words. So it's usually concepts that are boiled down to a few words, and those words are presented. Dukkha is a good example. Dukkha means everything from mild disappointment all the way up to extreme emotional, mental, and physical suffering. Dukkha covers all that. So even in context, we have to understand what the Buddha is talking about when he's teaching dukkha. The most important thing that I came across in reading the Pali Canon, it took a lot of reading to get to this point, was understanding the consistency that the Buddha presented throughout his teachings, and that everything he taught was in the context of Four Noble Truths and in the context of dependent origination. So it's not really the right word to use a translation from English to English, but my adaptation from the English scholarly translation to what I put in the books and what I put in the articles is always with that in mind, with a consistency towards dependent origination and Four Noble Truths. And to use modern words and to be less repetitive. When those of you that have read the Pali Canon, it's brutally repetitive. And there's a reason for that. Originally, this was just an oral tradition. So the way to preserve an oral tradition is through repetition. When it first became time to write this down, they followed that oral tradition. So there's a lot of repetition. So I've cut some of that out too. But to make a much more useful and easily understood Dhamma is the reason why that's there, and to present that consistency. So that's the introduction. Why don't we just go around the room briefly? And if you have any questions on the course, and I'd just like to hear how your practice is going, and then we'll just set it up for next week. So start with Margaret. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. My practice is going sporadically. The holidays are a bit of a distraction.
Yep.
So I'm recommitting to that in the new year. And I'm feeling good about this course. Something that you said struck me when you said that sometimes it's the question itself that causes the confusion.
Yeah.
That resonated with me tonight.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you. A self-referential ego self, that which the Buddha said is Anatta, insists on having an answer to every question it can come up with. Why? Because it has established itself in the question and in the answer. That's why the Buddha would often just say, it doesn't deserve an answer. It doesn't pertain to the Dhamma. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. I'm excited about doing this course again, too. Stefan, good to see you.
Hi. Yes, for me, I think my practice has been disrupted by holiday travel, being in a lot of places, and doing different non-routine things. But doing okay. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Tell Maeve I said hello. Mary Beth, good to see you. How are you tonight?
Good, and getting my practice back on track. More disrupted than I would have liked with yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to say really. And I'm looking forward to going back to the book and listening, even if I can't get there, I could follow along and listen to the recordings.
Good. Yeah. Glad you're here.
Thanks.
Helen, good to see you. How are you?
Thank you, John. Good to be here, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year.
My practice was a little interrupted with the holiday and coming in and out, which was a wonderful distraction anyway. But one good distraction was my daughter was home from California.
Nice.
And we had an opportunity to talk about the Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, and listening to the class that I missed from the 26th, I guess, the day after Christmas, and that Tuesday as well as the Thursday. And there were some really wonderful things in there that I'm going to see if I can get Natalie to listen to also.
Oh, great.
One of the conversations she and I had while she was home. So while my meditation hasn't been consistent, in a sense my practice has. So I enjoy that. So I'm really looking forward to revisiting this again, this series, because I know Liz talks about it, the lessons folding over onto each other.
Yeah.
And my visual is kind of like a spiral where you learn something and then at some point it again lines up with something you learned before and reinforces it, and you learn something else, and then that lines up with something else.
Yeah.
And so it's a spiraling, expanding knowledge and understanding, and I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for all that you do and bring to us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. I am looking forward to this again. Mary, good to see you.
Oh, good to see you. Happy New Year, everyone. My practice is going very well. Really happy with the way it's playing a priority against many distractions. And I'm really looking forward to this course. I read something, might have been from the first chapter, and then I listened to something, and I was like, you know, like many of us have said before, it's in some ways like hearing it for the first time. Or maybe a better way to say it for me right now is hearing it with a deepening nuance to walk away from what I'm hearing for better integration of the Christian in all aspects of my life. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah, too. Glad you're here. David, good to see you. How are you?
Good. Practice is going very well. This is actually going to be my first time actually going
Oh, that's
through.
right.
I've read the book twice, started with it again, and the one word I would say strikes me, and it came from the 6 weeks or classes of the Dhamma Study, that was context. Each time I read something, it becomes more ingrained because of the context.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the course.
Thank you. Glad you're here. Billy, welcome to our Sangha. And
Thank you.
I think some of the things that we're talking about are familiar to you, no?
Yeah, some of them are familiar. Yeah.
Good.
But thank you for inviting me in or taking me in or whatever, you know, welcoming me.
Welcome to our Sangha. You're in now. Can't get out.
I have to say though, my practice is completely off in a different
Yeah.
place than where you're describing. So I feel like I'm kind of heretical because what I'm doing is sort of this crazy Vajrayana visualization of a deity. And it's my understanding is it comes directly out of the Buddhist teachings, but it's a very long tradition. And it's elaborated and changed it and moved it around.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear your point of view. It's really, you know, a different kind of outlook on the whole thing. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Well, you certainly are welcome. And it doesn't bother us that you're practicing that crazy stuff now. It's just a different teaching, that's all.
Right.
And I think I mentioned a few times, I only teach what can be found in the Pali Canon. Because that seems to, I mean, that's what worked for me. And that's
Right. So how do you view all those other schools? Do you see them as completely wrong, or?
well, I wouldn't put the word wrong unless you say, is it what the Buddha taught? Even then, I wouldn't say it's wrong. It's just not what the Buddha taught. And I'm not shutting you down in any way. I won't get too deep into this. When you compare what the Buddha taught and his purpose as preserved in the Pali Canon, it's easily seen that he couldn't possibly teach other things.
Yeah.
And that-
Vajrayana or something
yeah.
like that.
And if you really look back into the history of where that came from, it has more akin with the bone religion. I know you know this.
Yeah.
Than anything that the Buddha ever taught during his lifetime. So there's accommodations. I'm not trying to sell this book, but there's a book out there called Becoming Buddha. And there's an article on my website on the Pali Canon, which goes into quite a bit of detail about where the split took place
Okay.
and how it has been supported over the years. So,
I'll have to read that.
yeah, the Mahasanghikas were a sect that were common within about 100, 150 years of the Buddha's passing, and gained a little bit of strength in the first 300 or 400 years. And by the third Buddhist council, about 400 years after the Buddha's passing, they decided they wanted a completely different type of Buddhism. They wanted to be visionary and have endless numbers of gods. They wanted the Buddha established as a god and one among many. They wanted those Buddhas to be going infinitely into the past and into the future, meaning always here.
Right, kind of like tantric sort of stuff.
Yes, and it was at that point that the Mahayana movement was born,
Okay.
and then different texts or sutras were developed to say that the Buddha taught this, but they were introduced much later. Now, again, that's all fine. It's just not what the Buddha taught. So I hope you continue to join us. You can practice both. And it's the only difficulty I have with modern Buddhism is it's often portrayed as this is what the Buddha taught. And I think that does what the Buddha taught a disservice, but it's not
How do you view Padmasambhava?
He was someone who interpreted what was available to him at a time, but also to fit it into his modern time, so that it would be acceptable to people. What took place in Burma and the modern Vipassana movement, insight movement, is the same thing. The Sayadaws wanted to introduce something that government workers could consume in a half hour. And so they taught a very refined meditation practice, period.
For practicality reasons.
For practicality, just so they would do something.
Right.
And for the most part, they've left out just about everything else that the Buddha ever taught. There are some teachings when you go back into, even Goenka, I'm getting a little bit off, excuse me, will give a talk on the Eightfold Path, but it was never taught as part of the path to awakening. This is something the Buddha taught too, by the way. So how do I do it? And those that have been coming here for a while, I just teach what the Buddha taught, and there's enough there. So I'm glad you joined us tonight. Eric, good to see you tonight. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have a practice at all, but it's nice to finally come in and meet you.
Yeah.
I've been hearing about you for some time now.
Referred to as emperor, right? Always.
And, yeah, I mean, I think like what you teach is interesting, and it's something that I look forward to getting to know.
Yeah, great. I hope you do. Again, you're coming at a good time. We're just starting the course. But if you're going to start meditation on your own, there's a guided meditation on the website. In fact, there's a few of them, 5, 10, 15, 20, up to 45 minutes. Start with a short period of meditation. If you can do that twice a day. And then as you develop the course, pretty soon you'll have a full-fledged meditation practice. Right, folks?
Right.
And it really will make some profound changes in your life for you. So I'm glad you're here. Frank, good to see you tonight. Always good to see you.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
I'm excited to start the course post-holiday. Now I have the time to do it. The last few years, especially the first year that I came here, we're already a few chapters into the book, and I had to play catch up. And tonight I thought we were starting on the first chapter, and I had Eric read the introduction in the first chapter before we came. So he was ready. And I'm like, hurry up and meditate now. I told him that, we recommend the 5 minutes and then twice a day, try to give him a little, introduction on it.
Good.
What I liked about the book the first time is that it was very simplistic, very practical, and it gives me a pragmatic approach to everyday living. And if it isn't practical, it's not spiritual for me.
Yeah.
And it helps me engage with my life every day. I can see all the attachments that I have through my own experiences. Like that was one of the things that I really liked, was that the phrase "Apsika," is that what it is? Come see for yourself.
Apasico.
Apasico. And that gives insight into my own personal experiences. And I'm not trying to look at it through somebody else's experience. It's more like myself, and it's more like the guideline and the the framework. It's I
Yeah.
love it, and my practice is great. The busier I get, the more I meditate. I don't know how that happens, but the busier I get, the more time I have to spend from it. Because it's like I'll meditate, work, and sleep, and eat somewhere in there, and that's pretty much it. So I benefit greatly from the practice. I just was on a vacation up in Killington, Vermont this past week. Freezing. All my adult kids, we were in really tight quarters, and we had a family living over us. They had little kids, and when their feet hit the floor at 6 a.m., it was like, it sounded like I heard elephants. And I don't know, I never would have been able to withstand that kind of aggravation or whatever you want to call it, like external things that make you aggravated. But it didn't aggravate me at all. I was actually finding humor in it. My kids were getting so angry. They wanted to go up and beat the little kids up. They were like, let's go get them. But it was really cool. And grateful. That's all.
Me too. I'm glad you're here, Frank. The Pasika, you have to experience it for yourself. And if you really understand that the Buddha's teaching us to be mindful of something that we just ignore, meaning the impermanent nature of all things and the wrong views of self, how else could we do it unless it's directly experienced? It's not something you could read in a book. And we have read it, and you heard me say it, that your views of yourself are wrong views, like Oda views. Doesn't mean anything to you, does it? Until you start deepening concentration and also have the proper framework of the Eightfold Path, none of it is really useful information, is it? But taken in the context that it was presented, it's the most profound teachings of all time. Larry remembered me. I wonder if Larry's joining us tonight. Larry remembered me saying that on retreat. I really believe that. What else could be more important than to have a direct way to understand who you are? Pretty good deal. Lorna, good to see you tonight.
Thank you. Good to be here, and also wish everybody Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Like everybody else, I'm looking forward to looking at the Eightfold Path again. I think that since the last time we went through it, I really appreciate how important the Eightfold Path is. I think as you get further into the teachings, then you kind of come back on yourself and you realize how what you think is the basic stuff is how important that is, which is the Eightfold Path. So that knowing and understanding that makes you excited about looking at the Eightfold Path again. You know, how it's worked for me anyway. My practice over the holidays, I did. To be honest, I did okay. I wasn't great, but I did okay. But there was one incident one evening. This is very unlike me. I usually drink alcohol maybe about twice a year or something like that. So once at Christmas and once at my birthday, and that's me. But anyway, I had a drink of alcohol. Went out to somebody's house and drinking alcohol. And when I was drinking, I realised I'm in the habit now of catching my mind, catching my thinking. I'm in a habit of it. And when I was drinking that night, I had a different mind altogether. It was strange to me. It was actually strange to have that mind. Just mindless mind.
Yeah.
And it was strange to me. And as I said, I don't drink alcohol very often, and I actually forgot you get a hangover. That's how often I drink. I forget you have a hangover.
Did you really have a hangover?
A little one.
I don't know what that is. I never had a little hangover.
This morning. Oh, yeah. So that was an interesting little look into my alternative mind, which I don't get there. I think that's all I have to say.
That's good. Thank you. As we develop a common, in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha said that mindfulness becomes continuous and steady. It does become, then we notice a difference when it's not there.
Yeah.
That's a profound understanding to be able to develop it to that point, that we know when we're mindless.
Yeah.
You know, how else can we change unless we're able to unless we have a way to look at these? That's why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. It's still surprising to me that I could spend so many years in Buddhism and very, very, very rarely hear anything mentioned of the Eightfold Path or Four Noble Truths. It was very, very uncommon. Maybe once or twice in 15 or 20 years, and certainly not as a path. And then when you read what the Buddha actually taught, it's all he ever taught as far as developing awakening. And then when we start to integrate it, and it changes everything. Except Bill. I'm sorry. Every one of you has spoken in the past about how the Eightfold Path has shown you its own efficacy. You see the practicality. Again, that's what Ehepasika means. You won't have that joyful engagement that Lorna is talking about unless you actually do it. How could you? You wouldn't know where it's coming from. Thank you. Bonnie, good to see you tonight. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. My practice has actually gotten stronger over the holiday. Peace with wherever my monkey brain is.
Yeah, good for you. The only one that seems like their practice got better over the holidays. It's such a common thing. I mean, we just get busy, and it's the nature of distraction. You know, and Frank's the only one that I know that when the busier he gets, the more he meditates.
Only because I have to, I think.
It's become a true refuge to you. I mean, that's what that's what it should be.
It really helps me be peaceful when I'm peaceful.
Yeah. I think that's how most of us feel about meditation, that it is. It's that few minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, really does become a refuge. Is exactly how it was meant to be. And then as we deepen, and as you'll see, over the next few weeks, as we deepen our integration of the Eightfold Path, there's so much true power that comes from living within that framework, because we don't have to second guess ourselves anymore. We know that our motives are pure and our view of things is clear. It's based on reality, not based on what we would like things to be. And as we start to integrate the moral and ethical factors, that brings its own type of freedom, because we know we don't have to watch ourselves anymore. We know that we're acting in a skillful way all the time. We don't even have to question our efforts when we deepen our efforts through right effort. We know that we're engaging in the Dhamma the way it was meant to be engaged with. We don't have to second guess our meditation practice. We just do it because we know it's what an awakened human being taught. Remarkable. So next week you'll read the chapter on Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, and then we'll discuss that. And just think about, most of you have been meditating for a long time. Bill, I hope you join us through this study, and maybe you could give some insight into the differences in applying meditation this way. We'd love to hear that. And then to be mindful of how Shamatha-Vipassana meditation does deepen our concentration. It brings samadhi, a non-distracted mind. And we'll talk about that next week. And all 3 classes are going to be on the same chapter each week, going through this. In case you miss a class or it snows or something, we can just keep it going. So,
John?
Yes.
Liz sends her best. She may even be listening. Was sad
Hi,
she
Liz.
couldn't be here, but she was out in New Mexico and heading her way back. So I was going to give her a shout out.
Hi, Liz. If you're there, there's 2 folks on. It might be Liz. I hope to see you next week. I think that I'll have the info on the spring retreat reservations up probably by the end of this week.
Do you have the dates?
They're up on the board.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, we have our 2019 dates too, because they're getting busy up there. When we first started going up there, we could have any weekend we wanted, just about. But now
And we confirmed it's not Mother's Day, right?
we confirmed it's not Mother's Day. I'll never do that. Well, I was gonna say I'll never do that again, but I was certain it wasn't Mother's Day.
Oh, I went anyway. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it's coming up too. So, all right. Any other questions or comments about our course or anything like that? Okay, we'll finish with metta as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And while remaining mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath, let go of any thoughts that may have arisen, directing your thinking to the past or the future or from tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.
We leave the mats out?
Yep, the mats can stay right where they are.